The researcher Haudi Mikoski describes a parallel reality that exists alongside ours that is home to parasitic entities that feed off human minds. The Gnostics believe that the Archons, who once controlled our entire planet as cosmic rulers, now work on a smaller but equally destructive scale. They attach themselves to people who have a primarily negative outlook on life, whispering in their ears, draining us of our energy, and clouding and altering our perception of reality. These creatures jump from person to person and feed for relatively short periods and mainly come together in location-specific places like malls, airports, and museums. Across the Middle East and North Africa, there are a handful of location-specific anomalies that defy scientific explanation. For example, deep within Morocco's Atlas mountain range, there is a small area no larger than several square feet where all sound ceases to exist, with hikers and guides alike reportedly unable to hear anything, including themselves. This anomaly on Jebel Yagur is understood to be intermittent, shifting position, so its location is impossible to pinpoint. A larger location-specific phenomena has been reported by multiple eyewitnesses in the Bakirköy district in Istanbul, Turkey. According to local news reports, one of its oldest villas would literally vanish off the face of the earth for a second once a year, to spontaneously reappear again. However, one of the largest location-based anomalies that boasts an estimated range of 125 kilometers can be found in the heart of the Levant, nicknamed the Jerusalem Syndrome. This mind-altering anomaly typically impacts travelers to the city, where upon arrival, they would undergo an extreme personality change, developing religiously themed psychosis until they leave the area. Since the late 90s, the anomaly has been covered a handful of times by the international media, who have mostly dismissed it as an unusual type of religious mass hysteria, but none of them have dug deeper into the origins of the phenomena and connected it to the manuscripts found in the Nag Hammadi Library. Could apocryphal Gnostic texts concerning ancient Palestine prove that type of Lovecraftian horror is deliberately infecting the minds of 21st century visitors? Back in 2020, the YouTube channel Scare Theater brought to the paranormal community's attention the psychological phenomenon known as the Jerusalem Syndrome, comparing it to mental afflictions typically found in the SCP Wiki. This wiki is a compendium of user-generated stories detailing fictional paranormal anomalies and events. The wiki itself is not important to this episode, but the concept within it is. Some of its anomalies are psychological in origin and come under the umbrella term of cognitohazards, meaning hazards that can impact the cognition and perception of an individual or entire population, typically through supernatural means. It is fun, over-the-top science fiction and should not be taken seriously. However, the Jerusalem Syndrome is a real-life cognitohazard that, like its fictional counterparts, rewrites a person's perception of reality. For each person this impacts, the process of cognitive decline is creepily uniformed, occurring in the exact same manner, regardless of the individual's race, social class, education, and background. According to psychologists, many of those afflicted are suddenly convinced that they are biblical personalities who were sent to the city on a divine mission. Dr. Yer Barel, the head of the Kfar Shal Mental Health Center, states that the first stage of cognitive loss typically begins within 3 hours of arriving in the city. Initially, the subject will go through a period of intense psychological distress, where they are plagued by a sudden wave of irrational thoughts, sensing that something is wrong. They begin to question the nature of their reality, wondering if they may actually be from the past, displaced from biblical times, and if so, why. This would usually be followed by an urge to isolate themselves and explore the city alone. According to Barel, in advanced cases of cognitive decline, the subject would begin wearing a white gown and start singing or shouting religious scripture or songs. In the final stage, they might be compelled to journey to a holy landmark where they would deliver a sermon, usually completely nonsensical in nature. However, when the individual leaves the city, he or she would regain complete mental composure. When later questioned about their psychosis, all subjects remember the details of their experience, while also expressing strong embarrassment about it, meaning they are completely aware of how bizarre and out of character they were behaving, indicating that whatever they went through was completely involuntary. Most disturbingly, some say that they felt something opening up within them, compelling them to behave this way. Even though Jerusalem Syndrome is not listed as a recognized condition in the DSM-MD, research conducted at Kfar Shal Mental Health Center revealed that at least 1,200 people had been struck down by the syndrome between 1980 and 1993. And as the year 2000 approached, this figure increased significantly. The BBC states, at the turn of the millennium, doctors from Israel's Kfar Shal Mental Health Center reported seeing around 100 tourists a year with the syndrome, 40 of whom were hospitalized. These were Christians, Jews, and even Muslims. It was estimated that as many as 50 people a week would require hospitalization, a dramatic increase from the average of 20 per year. Although the vast majority of videos and articles state that this phenomenon was first diagnosed during the 1930s, psychologists have been recording instances of the anomaly since the 18th century. In late 2017, one of the most high-profile instances of Jerusalem Syndrome made international headlines when the 29-year-old British tourist Oliver McAfee went missing. Oliver spent 3 weeks touring the country on his bike without incidents. Beginning in the West Bank, he traveled north to Galilee and the Golan Heights, before making his way down to Jerusalem. However, it appears that something may have happened to him after he entered the city, because his behavior appeared erratic after he left, traveling into the Negev desert, where he vanished. Oliver's camera was later found in the desert with his backpack. Some pictures were of mundane shots, while others were of biblical phrases written on his hands. Police also found notebooks filled with strange writings about God, as well as his desire to throw away all of his food and personal items. Some of his belongings were even found in the middle of things that looked like altars. His last photo was taken at Zichor Junction, 1 hour north of the city of Eilat, not too far from a military checkpoint. It was later revealed that officers had encountered a man who was either drunk or very mentally ill, matching the general description of Oliver. However, instead of helping, they merely warned him to stay away from the base, whereupon he fled back into the desert, never to be seen again. Now, watching this episode, you will logically conclude that Oliver and all other instances of Jerusalem syndrome must have occurred in people who were already mentally ill. However, according to Oliver's family, he did not have any prior psychological problems. He was a very level-headed individual who, prior to entering the country, was engaged in aid work in Mexico. Like Oliver, many other people who have exhibited the sickness also had no history of mental illness. In fact, Professor Eliezer Whitsom, one of the leading experts of the phenomenon, notes that while 82% of those diagnosed had a distinct history of psychiatric problems, the remaining 18% of cases had no history at all, meaning that a significant number of perfectly healthy individuals, regardless of their mental health, had developed the syndrome. Occam's razor would say regardless of prior or current mental health, Jerusalem syndrome is ultimately just hysteria, something buried in all of us who have a love for the Holy Lands. However, one obscure French theory points to an ancient horror that might be using this hysteria as a disguise to cause havoc in the 21st century. And this is where this episode gets weird. I mean, weirder. This theory references apocryphal biblical verses found in the book The Apoclipse of James. In it, there are verses that states that Jesus warned the disciple to flee Jerusalem, saying, "Fear not, James, you too will they seize, but leave Jerusalem, for it is she who always gives the cup of bitterness to the sons of light. She is a dwelling place of a great number of Archons." In Gnosticism, the Archons were malevolent ancient cosmic beings who once controlled the earth, as well as many of the thoughts, feelings, and actions of humans. Therefore, this verse has been interpreted by a few as evidence that they once and still have a limited influence over visitors to the city of Jerusalem. For those unfamiliar with the Apocalypse of James, this is the oldest known copy of a text claiming to be Jesus teaching to his brother James. Found in the late 19th century, these rare manuscripts were initially discovered in a trash dump in the Egyptian town of Axirinches, scattered among piles of 5th century papyrus. In the first Apocalypse of James, Jesus reveals that the world is guarded by these demonic archons. The origin of the word archon is actually a Greek term for ruler, implying that the mythology surrounding these creatures was more symbolic in origin, pertaining to social and political governance. However, if we decide to interpret them literally, then that will take us into the realm of the supernatural. In classical Gnostic writings, Archons function as psycho-spiritual parasites. According to the filmmaker Jay Weidner from the Gaia organization, the Gnostics believed that the Archons, who once controlled our entire planet as cosmic rulers, they attach themselves to people who have a primarily negative outlook on life, whispering in their ears, draining us of our energy, and clouding and altering our perception of reality. Weidner says that the Archons thrive on fear, sadness, anger, confusion, and stress, and this is all being delivered through the mass media. In Islam, we have a similar concept called waswas, which is very loosely defined as whisperings of a supernatural origin. The symptoms sometimes manifest as obsessive-compulsive thoughts that, although not serious in itself, can lead to more chronic mental conditions similar to what Weidner has outlined. Now, while Islam states that this is merely a natural part of being human and can be dealt with via both spiritual and psychiatric means, others take the threat to its most literal extreme. For example, the researcher Howdy Mikoski describes a parallel reality that exists alongside ours that is home to parasitic entities that feed off human minds. According to Mikoski, these creatures jump from person to person and feed for relatively short periods and mainly come together in location-specific places like malls, airports, and museums. So you can see why a comparison has been made between this theory and the Jerusalem Archon hypothesis. On a side note, similar location psychological anomalies have also been recorded in Florence, Italy, as well as in Paris, the latter of which primarily affects Japanese visitors. Jay Weidner states that information about these beings were lost after the destruction of the Library of Alexandria, and what little was left was suppressed until the discovery of the Nag Hammadi Library in Egypt in 1947. Within this library, we learn much about Gnosticism, where according to Weidner, the Gnostics preached about the planetary invasion by the Archons that occurred around 3600 BC. This incursion has been labeled as the Kurgan Invasion, where these beings entered our world via a dimensional rift in the Caucasus, and from here spread through parts of Neolithic Europe, ancient Iran, and of course the Levant. This invasion was like a mental virus, a cognitohazard that infected the human mind, and has so far taken place 3 times over the past several millennia. The mode of operation of these beings is to completely warp our perception of reality to the point that we cannot separate the real from the fictional, filling our thoughts with overwhelmingly negative impulses and attitudes. This is why a comparison was recently drawn between these invasions and the verse where Jesus allegedly spoke about an evil supernatural force in Jerusalem and the modern-day Jerusalem syndrome. Now, the evidence for this is questionable at best, but those who truly believe in this theory draw a correlation between these invasions and other major historical events, where large groups of ordinary people have become irrationally violent. They state that the third and final invasion of the Archons took place in 1996 in Rwanda, Central Africa, during a time where one of the most gruesomely horrific events in the modern era ever took place. In conclusion, while the concept of an all-powerful alien race invading our dimension and entering our minds is far-fetched, throughout history and across many cultures, demons, or jinn, have traditionally been seen as either the causes of mental illness or beings that can dangerously influence our thoughts. While psychiatric breakthroughs since then has invalidated much of these theories, every so often a phenomenon would occur that goes slightly beyond all scientific explanation. But what do you think? Is this just hysteria, or the tip of an iceberg of something far more ancient and insidious? Comment below. Be sure to check that you are subscribed, and come across to my personal channel, the Library of Wisdom. Until then, see you in the next one.